In the heart of Eldridge Hollow, nestled among whispering pines and rolling fog, stood the aging yet dignified structure of Eldridge Elementary. Its newest addition to the teaching staff, Mr. Thorne, arrived with the autumn leaves, taking up the mantle of the sixth-grade classroom. His presence brought a peculiar chill, one that seemed to linger in the hallways long after he passed. Lily Carter, a sharp-eyed and imaginative student, couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling that Mr. Thorne was not what he seemed. It wasn't just his cold, piercing gaze that seemed to see right through you, or the way the air seemed to grow colder in his presence. It was something deeper, a feeling that whispered of hidden truths and concealed horrors. From the first day, strange occurrences began to unfold within the walls of Mr. Thorne's classroom. Books would fall from shelves without being touched, shadows danced in corners where light should not reach, and an unexplainable draft seemed to swirl around Mr. Thorne as he lectured on ancient history, his favorite subject. Lily's suspicions deepened when she noticed the subtle changes in her classmates. Those who were once vibrant and outspoken became withdrawn, their eyes clouded with a mix of fear and confusion. Even her best friend Jamie seemed distant, mumbling about nightmares that left him awake at night, shadows creeping at the corners of his room. Determined to uncover the truth, Lily began to watch Mr. Thorne closely. She noticed how he rarely ventured outside during daylight, how his eyes seemed to flicker with a strange light when he spoke of the darker periods of history, and how animals would strangely avoid the school grounds since his arrival. Her observations led her to the old school library, a place filled with dust-covered books and long-forgotten knowledge. There, hidden among ancient texts on folklore and mythology, Lily found references to creatures known as the Eldritch, beings that thrived on fear and could take on human form to blend into society. The descriptions matched Mr. Thorne too closely for comfort. Armed with this knowledge, Lily tried to warn others, but her claims were met with skepticism. Her teachers dismissed her stories as an overactive imagination. Her friends laughed it off, and even her parents advised her to focus on her studies rather than fanciful tales. But Lily couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread that filled the school, the way the fog seemed to grow thicker with each passing day, enveloping the building in a suffocating embrace. The final straw came when Jamie disappeared. One day he was there, his usual quiet self, and the next, his seat was empty, his parents frantic with worry. The disappearance of Jamie sparked a fire in Lily. She knew that Mr. Thorne was behind it, that somehow he had taken Jamie to wherever his kind came from. With no one to turn to, Lily took matters into her own hands. She waited until the school was empty, the hallways silent except for the echo of her footsteps. As she made her way to Mr. Thorne's classroom, the air grew colder, the shadows deeper. She found him there, under the dim light of the classroom, poring over ancient texts that seemed to writhe under his touch. Confronting him, Lily demanded to know where Jamie was, her voice echoing with a bravery she didn't feel. Mr. Thorne, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, simply praised her curiosity and intelligence, lamenting that such traits were wasted in a world that refused to see beyond the veil. The room grew darker, the shadows coalescing around Mr. Thorne as he began to change. His form twisted, growing larger and more terrifying, his human facade falling away to reveal the monster beneath. Lily realized then that she was facing an Eldritch, a creature of nightmares in the flesh. With a courage born of desperation, Lily grabbed the nearest object, a silver letter opener that had been a gift from her grandmother. She remembered the old tales that spoke of silver as a purifier, a weapon against darkness. As the Eldritch lunged at her, she struck, the silver burning its flesh like fire. The creature howled, a sound that echoed through the empty school and vanished into a cloud of shadows, leaving behind only the faintest trace of sulfur and the silver letter opener, now blackened and twisted. The next day, Mr. Thorne was gone, his disappearance as much a mystery as his arrival. Jamie returned with no memory of where he had been, only a deep gratitude for Lily, whose bravery had somehow called him back from the darkness. Eldridge Elementary returned to its peaceful state, the shadows receding and the animals returning. But Lily knew better than to think it was over. There were more mysteries in the world, more shadows hiding just out of sight, and she, with a heart brave and true, would be there to face them, armed with knowledge and the will to protect those she cared about. As for Mr. Thorne, or whatever he truly was, the tales of Eldridge Hollow whispered of a creature that walked in human guise, a reminder that monsters are real, and sometimes they teach sixth grade. But no one would believe you unless they, like Lily, had seen beyond the veil and faced the darkness themselves. In the depths of Whitewood Forest, nestled within a clearing that seldom saw the touch of sunlight, there stood an ancient, gnarled tree. Legends whispered among the townsfolk of Eldridge spoke of a curse laid upon the tree, a curse that beckoned the unwary with promises of desires fulfilled, only to twist their fates into nightmares. Daniel, a young man burdened with the weight of his own discontent, wandered into Whitewood Forest one fateful evening, drawn by tales of the tree's power. Disillusioned with his mundane life and yearning for change, he found himself standing before the tree, its presence ominous yet alluring. With a voice barely above a whisper, he uttered his wish to the night. "Grant me the power to reshape my destiny." The forest fell into a hushed silence, as if the very air awaited the tree's response. A soft, malevolent chuckle seemed to emanate from the twisted bark, and Daniel felt a chill creep up his spine. The tree's limbs contorted, reaching for him, and in that moment, a searing pain erupted in his chest, spreading like wildfire through his veins. He stumbled back, terror-stricken, and fled the forest, the tree's laughter echoing in his ears. In the days that followed, Daniel noticed the first signs of his transformation. His senses heightened to an animalistic degree. He could hear the whisper of leaves from miles away, see in the darkest nights as if bathed in daylight, and smell the fear of those around him. Initially, these changes thrilled him, a testament to his newfound power. However, the elation soon turned to horror as the transformation progressed. His skin began to harden, taking on a grey, leathery texture, while his eyes, once a warm brown, now glowed with a predatory yellow light. His hands, his tools for creating and shaping the world around him, morphed into grotesque claws, their touch capable of rending steel. Daniel watched, powerless, as his humanity was stripped away, piece by piece, leaving something other, something monstrous, in its stead. The horror of what he was becoming consumed him. Daniel isolated himself, fearing the harm he might bring to others, and loathing the creature he saw reflected in the mirror. Nights were the worst, filled with an insatiable hunger that gnawed at his insides, urging him to hunt, to feed. He resisted, clinging to the shreds of his humanity with a desperate fervor. Driven by a need to understand and perhaps reverse his curse, Daniel scoured ancient texts and sought out those with knowledge of the supernatural. He learned of the tree's origins, a malevolent entity imprisoned within the wood, feeding on the desires of those foolish enough to seek its power. The transformation, it seemed, was the entity's way of escaping its wooden prison by living vicariously through its victims. Armed with this knowledge, Daniel knew what he must do. He returned to Whitewood Forest, to the clearing that had become the scene of his damnation. The tree stood as he remembered, sinister and mocking. Daniel confronted the entity, not as a victim, but as an adversary. He acknowledged the power it had given him, but renounced the curse, declaring his intent to reclaim his humanity, whatever the cost. The battle that ensued was not of flesh, but of wills. Daniel, fueled by a desperate desire to be human again, fought against the entity's onslaught of visions and temptations, each more horrifying than the last. The entity sought to break him, to force him to fully embrace the monster he had become. But Daniel's resolve remained unbroken. As dawn broke, a piercing scream filled the forest, emanating from the tree itself. The ground shook, and the air shimmered with a palpable energy. When the light of the new day finally penetrated the clearing, the tree was no more, reduced to ashes that the wind quickly scattered. The transformation halted, leaving Daniel forever changed, but not entirely lost. His appearance slowly regained a semblance of humanity, though traces of the monster remained, a reminder of his ordeal. He returned to Eldridge, a man marked by his experience, carrying the knowledge of the darkness that lies in wait for those who dare to tamper with fate. Daniel's tale became a whispered legend in Eldridge, a cautionary story of desire and transformation. And while Whitewood Forest grew quieter, the townsfolk never forgot the lesson of the ancient cursed tree, that some powers are too perilous to seek, and some wishes are better left unspoken. For in the heart of the forest, where shadows dwell, and the line between man and monster blurs, the price of ambition is often one's very soul. In the small, seemingly tranquil town of Havenbrook, nestled within the embrace of dense forests and mist-shrouded hills, a group of friends found themselves bound by years of shared memories and unspoken bonds. Ethan, Mia, Lucas, and Sophie were inseparable, their days filled with laughter and their nights with whispered secrets under starlit skies. However, the fabric of their reality began to unravel one chilly autumn evening, when Lucas failed to meet them at their usual spot by the old lighthouse that overlooked the town. Initially, Ethan and the others attributed Lucas's absence to an oversight or a fleeting preoccupation. Yet, when he remained unreachable the following day, concern began to gnaw at the edges of their minds. Their worry deepened when they visited Lucas's home, only to be greeted by blank stares and confusion from his parents, who insisted they had no son named Lucas. Every trace of him had vanished, not just from Havenbrook, but from the memories of everyone except Ethan, Mia, and Sophie. The trio searched frantically for any sign of Lucas, delving into social media, yearbooks, and photo albums, only to find that every image and mention of him had been erased, as if he had never existed. They stood alone in their remembrance, a shared certainty of Lucas's existence that clashed with the world's adamant denial. Days turned into weeks, and the strain of their search began to erode the bonds that held them together. It was during one of their late-night meetings, as they pored over maps and plans with desperation-laden eyes, that Mia too disappeared. Ethan and Sophie, racked with grief and fear, found themselves once again facing a world that refused to acknowledge Mia's existence. The pattern repeated, a cruel cycle that saw Sophie vanish next, leaving Ethan to grapple with the horrifying reality of his solitude. He was the last, the only one who remembered them, who fought against the creeping doubt that perhaps he had conjured his friends from the depths of his own imagination. Driven to the brink of madness, Ethan scoured Havenbrook for answers, his inquiries leading him to an ancient, forgotten section of the local library. There, buried among tomes of local history and folklore, he discovered tales of the erasure, a phenomenon that plagued Havenbrook every century, claiming the town's inhabitants one by one, erasing not just their physical presence, but all memory of them from existence. The story spoke of a pact made with a malevolent entity that dwelled within the forest, a being that demanded a tribute of lives in exchange for the town's prosperity. The chosen few would be taken, wiped from the collective memory, ensuring the cycle continued, unchallenged and unnoticed by the wider world. Armed with this knowledge, Ethan ventured into the forest, driven by a desperate hope to confront the entity and reclaim his friends. The woods seemed to close in around him, the silence punctuated by the rustling of unseen creatures and the whisper of leaves speaking in tongues long forgotten. As night fell, the forest came alive with an eerie, unnatural light that guided Ethan to the heart of the darkness. There, in a clearing illuminated by an otherworldly glow, stood the entity, a shapeless mass of shadows and whispers that chilled the soul. Ethan, fueled by anger and loss, demanded the return of his friends, challenging the very nature of the pact that had claimed them. The entity, amused by his audacity, offered Ethan a choice: to join his friends in oblivion, forgotten by the world, but reunited in the void, or to live with the burden of memory, alone and haunted by what he had lost. The cost of breaking the cycle was his own erasure, a sacrifice that would free Havenbrook from its century-old curse. Faced with an impossible decision, Ethan chose memory over oblivion, a solitary existence marked by the knowledge of what had been lost. With a final, anguished cry, he broke the pact, the entity's laughter echoing in his ears as it faded into the nothingness from which it had come. Ethan returned to Havenbrook, to a world that remained oblivious to the tragedy that had unfolded at its borders. He lived his days as a guardian of memory, chronicling the stories of Lucas, Mia, and Sophie, ensuring that, though they were erased from the world, they would not be forgotten. The town of Havenbrook prospered, unaware of the price paid for their continued existence. Ethan, now an old man, spent his final days by the old lighthouse, looking out over the town that owed its innocence to his sacrifice. As he passed, the wind carried whispers of gratitude from the friends he had saved, their voices a bittersweet symphony that accompanied him into the unknown. And in Havenbrook, life went on, the cycle broken, its people safe from the erasure. Yet, in the depths of the forest, shadows stirred, a reminder that some pacts, once made, leave echoes that linger long after the voices that forged them have fallen silent. In Ravenwood, a town shrouded in perpetual fog and embraced by ancient pines that whispered in the wind, Emily Carter lived a life of quiet solitude. Known for her vivid imagination, Emily's dreams were a canvas of intricate details and sprawling narratives. However, her dreams had always been just that, ephemeral escapes from reality, vanishing with the morning light. This fragile boundary between dream and reality was irrevocably altered one crisp autumn night. As Emily drifted into sleep, her mind conjured an unsettling scene. She found herself wandering the desolate paths of an abandoned carnival. The air was thick with a silence so profound it seemed to muffle her every step. The carnival rides, once teeming with life and laughter, now stood as rusted sentinels, their skeletal structures groaning under the weight of years. The ground was littered with remnants of joy long past: a tattered teddy bear, a broken carousel horse, and tickets that danced like ghosts on the wind. Drawn forward by a force she couldn't resist, Emily approached the Hall of Mirrors. Its entrance was framed by once gaudy lights, now dimmed to a sinister glow. Inside, the mirrors warped and twisted her reflection into grotesque parodies of human form. As she navigated the labyrinth, a creeping dread settled over her. The reflections began to move of their own accord, mimicking her actions with a mocking delay before turning hostile, their expressions twisted in malice. Heart pounding, Emily sought the exit, only to be confronted by her own reflection stepping out of the glass. This doppelganger, a dark echo of herself, reached for her with hands that seemed to ripple like water, its touch cold as the abyss. Emily turned and ran, her breath coming in ragged gasps, until she stumbled and fell, her scream swallowed by the encroaching darkness. She awoke with a start, the images from her nightmare lingering like cobwebs, the emotional residue clinging tighter than shadows at night. Shaken, she tried to shake off the remnants of the dream, attributing its vividness to the stress of recent days. Yet, as Emily ventured into town the following afternoon, an inexplicable pull drew her towards the outskirts, where the dense fog grew thicker, almost palpable. It was there, nestled in a clearing she had never noticed before, that the impossible took shape before her eyes, an abandoned carnival, its entrance arch creaking as it swayed gently in the wind, the scene an eerie mirror of her nightmare. The sight rooted her to the spot, her heart thundering in her chest. Rational thoughts collided with primal fear. Logic dictated this couldn't be real, yet here it stood, as tangible as her own trembling hands. Compelled by a mixture of dread and determination, Emily stepped forward, her movements hesitant as she moved through the gate. The carnival was silent, save for the soft creak of the ride swaying in the breeze. The ground was strewn with the detritus of 1,000 forgotten joys, just as it had been in her dream. Emily's steps took her inexorably towards the Hall of Mirrors, its entrance grimly inviting. As she entered, the atmosphere shifted. The air inside was stifling, charged with an unseen energy that prickled her skin. The mirrors, faithful to her nightmare, distorted her reflection into monstrous forms that sneered and mocked her. A visceral fear took hold, urging her to flee, but a deeper, more compelling force urged her onward. When her reflection stepped out of the mirror, just as it had in her dream, Emily felt the last threads of her disbelief unravel. This echo of herself, dark and twisted, regarded her with an unfathomable gaze, before speaking in a voice that was both hers and not. You knew this moment would come. The barrier between dream and waking is thinner than you believe, Emily. What you fear, what you run from, finds its way here. And now, you must face it. The confrontation was not physical, but existential. Emily, confronting her doppelganger, was forced to confront her deepest fears, insecurities, and the dark thoughts that lurked in the corners of her mind. It was a battle of wills, a test of courage that demanded she look beyond the surface, fears to the core of what truly haunted her. When Emily finally emerged from the Hall of Mirrors, the carnival was gone, dissipated like mist under the sun. She stood alone in the clearing, the fog lifting to reveal the familiar landscape of Ravenwood. The experience, though vanished, left an indelible mark upon her soul. She understood now that the barrier between dream and reality was not as impermeable as she had believed, and that the true horror lay not in the nightmares themselves, but in what they revealed about the depths of her own mind. Returning to her life in Ravenwood, Emily carried with her a newfound strength, a deeper understanding of herself, and the unsettling knowledge that some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed. The line between dream and waking had been blurred, and she knew that every night, when she closed her eyes, she might once again walk in a world where her deepest fears took shape. But she also knew she had faced the darkness once, and could do so again, armed with the light of awareness and the strength of her own resolve. In the quaint, often overlooked town of Merrow's End, where the edges of civilization blur into the encroaching darkness of the forest, stood an oddity that piqued the curiosity of any who passed by. Whispers and Shadows, an antique shop as enigmatic as its owner, Mrs. Blackwood, was a trove of relics, each with a history steeped in mystery. Among the myriad artifacts, a doll named Penelope sat perched upon a high shelf, her glassy eyes casting an unsettling gaze over the room, as if privy to secrets untold. Penelope was no ordinary doll. Crafted in the Victorian era, her porcelain skin, intricately painted features, and finely made clothing spoke of an age where such objects were not merely toys, but cherished companions. Her smirk seemed almost knowing, her eyes lifelike, as if imbued with a spark of the very essence they mimicked. It was on a day shrouded in storm clouds, with rain pelting the cobblestone streets of Merrow's End, that the Anderson family, George, Eliza, and their daughter Lily, found themselves seeking refuge within the peculiar confines of Whispers and Shadows. The family, new to town and eager to explore its secrets, was immediately captivated by the shop's collection. But it was Lily, with her boundless imagination and youthful innocence, who was drawn to Penelope, insisting that the doll was meant to be hers. Despite Mrs. Blackwood's hesitations, claiming the doll required a very special home and the hefty price tag that accompanied Penelope, the Andersons relented to Lily's pleas. That night, as the storm unleashed its fury upon Merrow's End, Penelope was given a place of honor in Lily's room, seated in a chair where she could watch over her new companion. In the days that followed, a series of peculiar events began to unfold within the Anderson household. Objects misplaced, doors swinging shut of their own accord, and a soft, childlike giggling that echoed in the stillness of the night. Lily was delighted, convinced Penelope was simply seeking a playmate in her new home. Her parents, however, were unsettled by these occurrences, a growing sense of unease taking root in their hearts. Then the nightmares began. Lily, once fearless, woke screaming in the dead of night, terror etched into her features as she spoke of Penelope's whispered desires to play forever in a shadowy realm where dolls ruled supreme and humans were naught but toys. Concerned for their daughter's well-being, George and Eliza decided that Penelope must be removed from their home. But Penelope would not be so easily discarded. Regardless of how far they took her, she always returned by morning, seated in her chair, her smirk wider, her eyes darker. Desperation led George back to Whispers and Shadows, only to find it closed, the once vibrant shop now lifeless, a for sale sign swinging morosely in its window. The townsfolk whispered of Mrs. Blackwood's sudden departure, of curses and haunted items she had collected over the years, leaving the Andersons to face their plight alone. In search of answers, they turned to a local historian, known for his knowledge of Merrow's End's dark past. From him, they learned of a girl from the Victorian era, whose soul became intertwined with her beloved doll, binding them beyond the veil of death. Understanding the gravity of their situation, the Andersons, with heavy hearts, sought to sever the tie that bound the spirit to Penelope. Lily, realizing the danger, tearfully parted with the doll, placing her in a box alongside toys and trinkets, hoping to appease the spirit with tokens of friendship. Under the light of a full moon, they buried the box in the depths of the forest, reciting words of release and peace, a plea for the spirit to find rest. For a time, peace returned to their home, the malevolent presence gone, the nightmares a distant memory. But Lily, now wary of the shadows that danced at the edge of her vision, often spoke of feeling watched. She whispered of seeing a figure at the forest's edge, Penelope's porcelain skin glowing ethereally in the moonlight, her eyes searching, always searching. The tale of the Andersons and the doll, named Penelope, became a whispered legend in Merrow's End, a story of curiosity and innocence entwined with darkness. They say that on nights when the storm winds howl, a child's laughter can be heard, weaving through the trees, and a soft voice, haunting in its loneliness, promises eternal friendship to those who listen closely. For in Merrow's End, where the veil between worlds grows thin, the past never truly rests, and some bonds, forged in love or obsession, refuse to be broken. The Andersons learned this, as did Mrs. Blackwood before them, a lesson etched in the annals of the town's history, a cautionary tale of the unexplained and the unseen that dwell just beyond the shadows.